We're going to talk a little bit about how I came to write The Bereaved. And I have a number of slides here with some old pictures, but it all started with when I was having my children, who are all in their 30s now, but when I was having my children in the 1990s, that's kind of when you start going, well, what is the legacy that I'm leaving here? What I need to look back and where did we come from, so I can tell my children this story. And as it happens, my father had one of those big boxes full of stuff. That's old business cards and everything from the paperwork that he got from his great-grandfather becoming a citizen. I mean, just all of the bits and bobs and obituaries and greeting cards and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we started, was the box in the closet. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, and then at the very end I'm going to do a very short reading from The Bereaved, so you kind of understand the main character and where she came from. It's just 2 pages, so it's not very long. And totally happy to take questions. Let's do them at the end. Probably just, hold on to those. And then I have some books here for sale. I don't have like hundreds of them, but I do have probably 20 of each. So if you are interested in the books, we can do that. I can sign them and so on. So that's, this is the classic 5-paragraph essay. I told you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it in 3 paragraphs, and then I'm going to wrap it up at the end. So this is one of those books that you can make, I think, through Walgreens or any of those photo books. And I made one of these for all of my siblings and all of my cousins, basically, of what this is going to be. But this is a thing that you can do with your family history research. You don't have to actually find a publisher and all that. It's about $20 a book, maybe 25, kind of depending. Watch for the Walgreens 50% off sale, and that's the thing to do. You can actually do it piecemeal through the year so that at Christmas you look very generous, but you actually got them for half off. Tightwad here. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about my family, just the ticket. So this little boy, this is my father. This is about 1930, and he's wearing grown-up man's pants because they couldn't buy children's clothes. They didn't have any money. They just had to use what they had. I don't know if any of you remember the Great Depression. You're probably way too young for that. But so my dad is right now still alive. He's 98, and this is little Billy right here when he was about 5. So he's standing here with several generations of his family, and I think I can do this, right? Okay, so this is his mother, Winifred, and his father, also William Park. And then this is my Aunt Barbara, so sister and brother here. Then Winifred's parents were Laura Dew and Fred Dew, these two. And then grandparents. So this is Grandpa Gaston and Grandma Gaston. So Grandma Gaston was a McDonald, and she was incredibly proud of being a McDonald. She could go back to Scotland. She knew her ancestors, and they had fought in the Revolution, and they were just all that in a bag of chips, right? They were just, she was a battle axe, you can see. She's got her, look at those shoes, she could just as soon kill you as look at you. And there's very few pictures of her smiling in any of the family photos. However, everyone else has got a smile. And then there's Grandpa Gaston. And he was a big fat nobody. He was a nobody. She was somebody, he was nobody. And why is that? It's because he was adopted. He was an orphan. Nobody knew who his people were. And in 1930 and the previous 70 years or what have you, that really mattered. It doesn't matter so much now. You're adopted, congratulations, nobody cares. But in those days, who was this guy? Big fat nobody. Grandpa Gaston. His name was William Lozier Gaston. And the only thing we knew about him was that he was adopted. Okay, so I was able to do my family history research on through my dad's box of incredible papers, and I could follow her back all the way to Scotland. Absolutely, no problem. The MacDonalds had a castle on the Isle of Skye. I've joined the Clan MacDonald and I've gone to the Scottish Games and hung out at the tent and have I mean, yeah, I bought into all that. But who was he? What was the story on him? So all we knew, William Lozier Gaston. There he is, look at him. This is his dog Trixie. He liked dogs. He's got a nice bowler hat and he's got the scrubbing bubbles mustache, you know, scrubbing bubbles. And then over here is the family at an earlier age. I believe this is he, and I believe this is his wife, and this is a sister. And then there's some other children that are not his. I think just one of those girls might be his, but not sure. That was not labeled. William Lozier Gaston, who was he? It's what you call in your genealogy a brick wall. Do you guys have brick walls in your genealogy? How do you figure out who this person is? Well, he was adopted. So now you can go to court and you can ask for the records to be opened, or maybe you know that you were just a donation down at the center. What, you were a test tube baby, whatever it was, or you came from China or Russia during all of the times when those kids were being adopted, or Korea. There are a lot of those kids out there today. Who was he? Well, in that box, we had one piece of paper, literally a piece of stationery. You'd call it like onion skin or kind of the airmail paper, very thin, with this copper plate handwriting. I'm going to show you a better picture of it. It's kind of the background here, but it's this scribbly, beautiful handwriting. And we saw it and we're like, we don't know who this guy is. All we know is that somebody paid the fare of $7.50 for his train trip from New York City in 1856. That 56 is 1856. So reading this for the first time, M.T. Gaston, well, he's, who is M.T. Gaston? That would, I guess, be the adoptive father. And W.H. Lozier, or Lozier, or Lozier, how does one pronounce that name? We don't know him. We don't know any of the family. W was the William, H, no idea. And for years, it says friendless here, but for years I thought it said foundling, which makes sense, right? What do they call that? Something or other, confirmation bias, where you think you know already, so you see what you want to see. I said, well, that's Home for the Foundlings in New York City. And I spent a lot of time looking for Home for the Foundlings, which does not exist because it was Home for the Friendless. And then who's this dude? No idea. What's an so I don't know what that means. No idea. So this is 1990 was the first time I saw this slip of paper. This is what it actually looked like. There's a little there's a little bird sort of thing right here impressed into the paper, and I had this idea maybe I could figure out where the paper came from, you know. Like I'm on CSI or something. But doesn't this look like foundling? You would think it was foundling maybe if you didn't really. NY City to Oberlin, Ohio. Oberlin, 1856. And then this was hard to read. James, Joe, Lowe, what? What is that? And I didn't know that said agent. I actually didn't know what any of that said. So can you blame me? I didn't know it. I mean, I just thought he was a foundling. That must mean that he was left on the doorstep. That's what I imagined. I guess I've been watching too much TV. So where do you start? You start with what you know, right? And just so you know, I'm a career journalist. I'm not an investigative journalist so much as, you know, about, oh, we're getting new fire hydrant, or there's going to be, they're going to raise school taxes a third of 1%, or whatever it is. That kind of local community, like you'd have a weekly paper here. I did that for decades, actually, editing and so on. But I know how to find information. I know how to, before the internet, I knew how to go to the library. Once we get the internet, I figured out how to look things up. I like to do it, I enjoy it, and I go down the rabbit hole and I really enjoy it. So I thought, I'm gonna find out, what can I find out about W.H. Lozier. And who are the Gastons? The Gastons are the people who adopted him. So Oberlin is the town. This is behind here is the census papers. And over here it's the county of Lorraine, state of Ohio. And who are the Gastons? Okay, M.T. Gaston, as it said on the other page, he was a carpenter from Massachusetts, born in Massachusetts, and he was the fire chief. And look at that mighty beard. He's got a fantastic beard. He would be perfect today with a big beard like everyone else. Then his lovely wife, Matilda Valletta Gaston, remember that name, Matilda Valletta Gaston, and they had 3 daughters, and the first two, or the first one was Celia, and the second 2 passed away as children, which happened a lot in the old days because they didn't have vaccinations, didn't have good health care. If, mother couldn't produce milk, then you were up a creek, whatever it was. It could have been anything. As well as we have special needs kids today, but those children generally did not survive. If they needed to be in the intensive care, they weren't going to make it if they were premature, obviously. So anyway, they had 2 children who passed, and they clearly still wanted another child. So who was Celia? We had this picture in my dad has a roll top desk with some stuff, and it must have come out of that same box or that same batch of stuff. We didn't know who that person was. And it was on a glass plate, like a glass negative thing, and kind of faded by the sun. But I had a friend who was a graphic artist, played with it and upped it, and I was like, who is that? I don't know who that is. One of the lost ancestors. Well, when I went to Ancestry.com, and I found the Gastons, and I found Celia, that's Celia. So we actually had his his sister, adoptive sister's picture, but nobody knew who she was. Again, Grandpa Gaston died in like 1940, thereabouts. So nobody's around anymore who remembers him, and certainly she's gone to her reward as well. But in any case, this is what I know. So now I know I have this picture of someone who was dear to him. I was able to find information about Marshall Gaston, and I found out that his mother's name was Matilda, or his adopted mother's name, Matilda Valletta Gaston. Okay, so now that's how much I know. So then, if you look through the various census papers, I always want to call them censi because censuses sounds wrong, right? So if you look through the various census papers from 1856, so the papers were 60, 70, 80, of course 1890 there was a big fire and all those have been lost. Most of those have been lost, and we rue that, but we genealogist folk are sad about that. But in any case, where were we? So here's 1870. Now Willie, in 1860 he was Willie, and he was 9 years old and he was a student. And now it's William Gaston, and he's on here somewhere, works in a drugstore somewhere on here. It's hard for me to see it up close, but in any case, he's on this sheet, and he has his birthplace as New York, which is correct according to, well, actually we didn't know it was correct. He has his birthplace as New York. He came from New York. He could have been born anywhere, but he came from New York on the train. Okay. And where's his home? Oberlin, Lorraine County, Ohio. Okay, he's white, he's male, he's unmarried, and he's a clerk in a drugstore. Actually, I think this is he right here. So that's what he knows about himself. Who was Will Gaston? Well, isn't he a handsome, dapper dude? He was married in his early 20s to the lovely Winifred MacDonald, and her father was a minister, and his father was also a minister in the Episcopal Church, and so they were very active in their church and sang in the choir, all of that. Okay. In Will Gaston's papers is this very interesting snippet. So sometimes you see these in the paper, you find them around, you see them as a meme on Facebook. What does your last name mean? Well, clearly Will Gaston wanted to know who he was, but there's one problem. He's not a Gaston. So he wants to know who he is. This is what this tells me. Who am I? Where did I come from? I don't know, so I am grasping at the only thing I have, which is I am a Gaston, but he is not. Just how it is. Well, what else do we know about him? He's done all these great things. He is one of the lead salespeople, one of the best salesmen of pressed glass in the Midwest, according to these articles. He was very good at his career, which was door-to-door salesman, traveling salesman. Took the train here, there, and everywhere. And there's little snippets in the paper. In the old days, they would say, oh, and here comes traveling salesman, you know, Tom Smith is coming to town, and he's selling, you know, tractor parts or whatever it is that they would be selling, and it would be in the newspaper. And so there's a number of those out there that say that he was coming to town. And then there's a couple of things here, and I think it's funny in here that he has a large business following here and a number of friends who are always glad to shake his hand and welcome. And it says keep. He's keeping that. And then over here it says something, or it's hard to read it on here because it's kind of blown up. But one of his favorite expressions was never say die. Never say die, folks. All right, well, so we know that he was married and he had 2 daughters. One of them was Ethel May and the other one was Laura, which is her grandmother's name, Valletta, which is the adoptive mother's name. So if you hated your adoptive parents, would you name your child after them? Not likely. So that tells me what? He was in a happy home. He was happy. He wanted to be a Gaston, and he loved where he grew up enough to name his daughter for his adoptive mother. So I don't know any of this, but that's what I'm surmising, right? Well, there she is. That's her smile. Guess where they went on their honeymoon? Niagara Falls. That became famous because of Aaron Burr. Remember Aaron Burr in Hamilton? His daughter, Theodosia, when she got married to whoever she married, they went from Saratoga Springs over to Niagara Falls, and they were such jet setters that everybody wanted to go on their honeymoon to Niagara Falls. So naturally, look at that hat. Naturally, these two had to go and be like, whatever, the fancy people. And here she is, buttoned up tight. And then these are their 2 beautiful daughters. This is Laura Valletta, and this is Ethel May, who did not make it out of infancy. I think that's the only picture, the oldest that she got to be. And this is, I mean, he was prosperous. That's a nice looking house, right? So there's other members of the family, but here he is, right here. Here's his mother-in-law, whose name was Laura, and here's one of the children. And there's some other family members here. I don't know all of them, but I tell you what, they're all the McDonald women were cut from the same cloth. This house existed up until about 3 years ago. It was still there, but they'd taken off all of the fancy things, and it was semi-stuccoed, and it was kind of run down. It was not a super nice area anymore, and as happens with these Victorian houses, eventually someone said, I could build an apartment building here and make more money. So it's gone now, alas. Okay, well, I did the best I could. I spent a lot of time looking for the Loziers or Loziers or whoever they were on ships arriving from France in New York City in 1850, because he was sent off in 56. So somewhere in that time frame, could there possibly have been a dude or a man and wife who came from France? If you look at the various censuses through Will Gaston's life, at a certain point he starts putting down where his mother or his father were French. Now, how does he know that? He doesn't know that. And it's actually not even true. I mean, he's guessing, who am I? I'm guessing that I'm French because Lozier would be a French name. And it is, but he was actually they were more descended from the Dutch on that side. And there's a part of France that's very Dutch. If you go up to Lille and you end up sort of in the Flanders area, and of course, your geography and all that. So the Loziers did come from France, but from a very Dutch part of France. But meanwhile, I'm looking at, where did they leave from Marseille, or where did they ship from? And I couldn't find them. I mean, I'm talking months of looking at this stuff. I did also reach out to crazy train people, and there's crazy train people who watch the trains go by and time them and all that stuff. Kooky train people. I did reach out to them, and I did make contact with a dude who said the train on that day would have been this train, and it would have left New York at this date and time, and they would have only gone by day because there was, they only had whale oil for the front light, and it was just not safe to travel at night. So the train would go by day, and then they would stop at a boarding house overnight and then get back on the train the next day. So I was able to find the train, but not exactly a manifest of who was on board it. But so I'm looking for this any way I possibly can, right? Still no answers. And then I think it was about 2014 maybe? I'm not sure the year this came out, but this is a novel that came out, and it was Christina Baker Klein. She's a very good author. So this book called The Orphan Train. When I was a kid, I saw some Disney movie about the Orphan Train. It was like the Sunday night movie or whatever it was about the Orphan Train. So what was the Orphan Train? Was the Orphan Train one single train and it was full of happy orphans just like you'd see in a Disney movie? It was not. Was it like the wine train in Napa, where every Sunday you can pick it up and have a very pleasurable ride and drink wine and look out at the vineyards? It was not. Was it a train full of orphans? It was not. The Orphan Train was a movement, and I'm gonna do a little side veer into some politics of the day. It was a movement from 1855 to 1930, when there was no social services for orphans or for children who came from a terrible background or who had their parents died, or one of the father had died, or the mother didn't have a husband, and she was working in a house of ill repute, and the kid was running wild on the street. If you had kids who misbehaved, if they got arrested, your choices were put them in jail with the adults, or so who was making money? Who were the tech titans of their day in 1850? The choo-choo trains, right? The railroad barons. They were racing across the prairie with their golden spike. We know that story. They were trying to do that, and it's just like the tech dudes right now, where this phone doesn't work with this phone, and the jack doesn't fit, and it's a different da-da-da-da. They had different gauges of railroad. This one's a narrow gauge, this one's wider gauge. Our train goes here, 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 and here. Well, our train goes there, 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 and there. And you can get there faster. Well, our train is more comfortable, and so on. So if you think of it like telecom right now, and how the various tech companies are trying to say, oh, well, we're better. Well, everything we have is pink, and everything we have is green. Whatever it is, same thing with the trains. And there were many, many, if you ever played Monopoly, there are many, many train companies back in the day. And those guys got rich. And when they were rich people, and so they built mansions in New York City, right? You've heard of the Gilded Age, and these wealthy people with telegraphs and the choo-choo trains and diamonds on their fingers and all of that kind of stuff. These are the people we're talking about. So now, the husband is the guy who's making all the money. The wife, not that different from my dear great-great-grandmother McDonald, Gaston, but the wives were do-gooders. They had time on their hands to do charitable works. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but in the United States, there was a Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals before there was a Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Kids were kind of left on their own, and if the family beat them, so be it. It's a private matter. So, children running in the street. You have a big mansion. Your wife has time on her hands. Let's start an orphanage and clean up these streets. And while we're at it, let's also form a society for saving the souls of these poor, women of the street. So the American Female Guardian Society was formed by the wives of a bunch of very wealthy men, which back in the day, if you were wealthy, you really actually felt an obligation to give back to the poor. They don't seem to have that anymore, but in those days, that was a thing that people did. And you had Home for the Friendless, which was one of many orphanages in New York City. So there were a few Jewish organizations that would take Jewish children. There were a couple of organizations for black kids. There were no Indians left at the time by that point in Manhattan, so they didn't count. And anybody else, they weren't, there weren't quite enough Irish or German or Russians or whatever to have their own home at that point. Catholic, there was a little bit of Catholic, there were some Catholic orphanages, but generally speaking, I talked to someone at the curator at the Orphan Train Museum in Concordia, Kansas, and she explained the American Female Guardian Society, and basically their role was to, and I quote, to make Protestants out of prostitutes. So their plan was to scoop all these people off the street. The benefit being clean streets. Nobody ugly and icky to look at when you come out for your stroll, your promenade on Sunday, for your carriage ride around the city. San Francisco did something very similar to this when they held the Super Bowl. They said, oh, homeless? We don't have homeless. And they all went to Oakland. Oakland suddenly had a homeless problem. San Francisco's streets are clean. So the problem with moving people is that they don't actually go away, they just show up somewhere else. So what would you do, so let's put our thinking caps on, what would you do if you had a bunch of dirty street kids and you had a train and your great nation wanted to expand across the western plains and plant corn and wheat and have cows and cattle and all that stuff to feed our growing nation. I think they called it Manifest Destiny. What would you do? What would be the equation of lots of street kids, choo-choo train? It would be easy enough to add an extra car at the back, and all those farmers out there. Any ideas? Choo-choo. So this was the answer to a political and social problem. There were no social services if it wasn't for a church or for any kind of organized orphanage, so to speak. And it was not luxury accommodations on these trains. I actually have, there's a photo here on a card that I'll show you later, that was an actual orphan train, was used to transport kids from New York to Kansas. And in Kansas, that train car got left behind, eventually became, it was a dentist's office for a while, and then it became a chicken coop. And the museum discovered that this thing still existed, and they rescued it and restored it. It is all wooden seats. It is no insulation, so winter or summer, no insulation. The windows did go up and down. They had a chamber pot and a bucket for water, and that was it. This was essentially a chicken coop on wheels for kids, for orphan kids. And so what would happen, they talk about it in this really great novel, The Orphan Train, and also the Orphan Train Museum has the information. Once a week, the Home for the Friendless would take 2 lines of children, boys and girls, little ones, big ones, They would go down to Grand Central Station and they would get on the last train. They would just, train car, they would just hook up their least exotic train car at the back. Kids would get on and away they go. So I actually have the route I will show you in a few minutes, but in any case, that's the orphan train in a nutshell, and they did this until 1930, and in the 1930s, we had the New Deal, and they started, and this thing called a social worker. You could actually go to college and learn how to be a social worker and look at social problems, and at that point, they started realizing that maybe economics was part of the problem, not just that all of these people were fallen, sinful people, because prior to that, these women were considered just beyond redemption. They were considered fallen women and with no redeeming social value. It had nothing to do with, you know, oh, with the economy, or you can't get a job, or society doesn't allow women to own property, you know, have money, open a bank account, blah, blah, blah. No, there must be something intrinsically wrong with them. Okay, so back to, that was my side trip, just to give you a little, like I said, a little politics and a little bit of history on why did we have orphan trains. And now you know why it was absolutely not like the Napa wine train or the skunk train or anything else. They went on once a week for 80 years. So something like 250,000 children were shipped out of New York City, and only 25% of those were actual orphans. So, okay, moving on. Oh, well, I should say, Christina Baker Klein wrote this great book, and it's about a girl today hearing the story and retelling the story of someone she's interviewing or whatever. And at the back of the book, there was a little index that said, oh, and I learned about this because my father-in-law was an orphan train child. Well, I thought, there's a museum? I should reach out to them. It never occurred to me. So anyway, orphan train, now it all makes sense, right? So, okay, so here we go, back on our trip. Boop. Did I go the right way? Well, here's the home for the friendless. It's at about 45th Street in New York City, kind of near, actually, it's right where, it's on, now I'm trying to remember the guy's name. The guy who, Dale Carnegie, is that guy? No, there's a church there that's right around the corner from here. Anyway, right now there's just a big tall building there. I've been there. It's just another big tall building. But it's kind of near Bellevue Hospital, and it's kind of up in the sort of Midtown area where this was located. Anyway, so here we are again, back to Home for the Friendless. This is a Home for the Friendless, which worked with the American Female Guardian Society. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. Well, once I reached out to the Orphan Train Museum, they said, oh my gosh, we have the whole other side of the story. You have that receipt? We've never seen a receipt before. We've never seen that piece. But we have everything else you need to know about this little boy and his 3 siblings, which I was like, there are siblings? Oh my gosh. So the brick wall came tumbling down, and the Orphan Train Museum in Concordia, Kansas, which has digitized everything. You can actually go there and do some research online at Orphan Train. Look for Orphan Train Museum online, and they have they've digitized all their records. And so you can see if your ancestor was one of their writers. In any case, now we break through and we find out that the Loziers, however you say their name, right? They lived in Newburgh, and this is the downtown, and then they lived kind of over here. This is from George Washington's headquarters. This is the Hudson River, and this was his headquarters during the Revolutionary War, was at Newburgh, and this was the actual building. And I used this little piece in the story because there's this house that was a smaller rock or stone house, and then they made it bigger. So it looks like the big house ate the little house, and that's actually in the story that I wrote because I thought that was fascinating. I'm like, that's genius. Then this is the Dutch Reformed Church that they belong to, the Dutch, through their Dutch ancestry in upstate New York, which makes sense because it used to be New Amsterdam, right? Okay, so then I'm up here looking around. I'm looking for the name Lozier. Who are they? The fascinating thing about these people, American Female Guardian Society and Home for the Friendless, is they kept meticulous records. They sent these kids out to various places and their dates and visited and sent a letter and blah, 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 and here he's of age, and off he goes. So this is, like, I can see how William Homer Lozier, what happened to him through the years. And I have it for the other three as well. They did not have any letters or anything else, but these were in books, like a big ledger sort of format. And this is page 200. And every time someone went to visit, they would say, so there he was sent to Mr. Marshall Gaston, and it said that who he was sent with, the agent J.R.A.R. Rogers. Remember, it's on the other sheet. That's exactly what it said on the other sheet. In March of 1958, then here visited again by Mrs. Penfield, went to visit. And so the society wrote to the children wrote back, wrote to the families wrote back. So there was quite a way of checking on them. Actually, in retrospect, it was a very clean and good system if it was a good fit. About 10% of the kids wasn't a good fit. They were sent back to the orphanage or sent to another home, or they could have been abused. And in the Christina Baker Klein's novel, the children were abused in not nice ways. But generally speaking, if the child was over 14, they were supposed to be paid for their labor. They weren't just supposed to be like slave labor. They're supposed to be either part of the family or paid for their labor. So, but our little William, he lived with a good family, and he didn't work, so they didn't like have a savings account or anything for him. He was just one of the family. Okay. All right. So who was this family? Now I know more about the family. 3 boys, 1 girl, and the widowed mother. So Martha Lozier, her husband, Abraham, passed away. And very shortly thereafter, the father-in-law, so Abraham's father, Malcolm, also passed away. And Malcolm Lozier was a pretty well-to-do guy up in Orange or Hope, Mount Hope, in that vicinity around Newburgh. So her husband died, then her father-in-law died, and everything seemed to fall apart because at that point, there was only a teenage boy left in that family and a bunch of daughters. So there was no like patriarch of the Lozier family. So of the 2 brothers, the only one there was like 16 years old. And he had a mother and 3 sisters or 4 sisters to take care of. And so Martha is there without her husband and without her father-in-law. So there's no, you know the thing about, you're a wife and your husband, there's this legal status called coverture, you're part of your husband. Well, they're gone, and there's no other dude who's gonna be able to protect her and her family. And I don't know why that she couldn't just stay. I don't know why, but for some reason, they left their little town in upstate New York on the Hudson River, an hour drive from Albany, I mean, beautiful part of the country. And they went down here. And this is what New York City was like at the time. So there's hundreds of people on the street, the tenements about 4 stories high. If you've been to New York City and you've been to the Tenement Museum, then you will see how dark those hallways were. They were in the 1850s lit by gas, but not all day, only at night. And the gas that they used was very sooty. It was very dirty. And in addition, everyone had their own little pots, little potbelly stove or something. So it was coal and wood smoke. Everything was dirty. It was impossible to stay clean or keep things clean. There would be laundry, you know, between the buildings and all this kind of stuff. It was rough, and things cost money because when you're on the farm, you got a chicken, you got eggs, you got your vegetable garden, you can pick apples, whatever, walnuts, you name it, right? Well, in the city, that's not going to happen. So for Martha, losing her husband was kind of the inciting event. It started there. She had some hope for a minute, and then her father-in-law is gone as well. At that point, she comes down to New York City, and she tries to keep it going. She's a dressmaker, not a seamstress. She's a dressmaker, and trying to get work. And this is before the big factories were happening. There was little in-home industry, and you could take home and sew buttons to a card. You could sew a couple of dresses, you know, for piecework and so on, but there was no real factory for women. There were cabinet factories, there were piano factories, there were in the neighborhood, there were all kinds of factories for men, but not for women. So as a woman, let's see, so there was, could she go teach school? Well, she wasn't qualified, and who's gonna watch the kids? Could she be a nurse? Well, that wasn't even a thing yet, you know, not until the Civil War. Women as nurses wasn't a thing. Let's see, stewardess, not a thing. Even on the trains, not a thing. So what could she do? She could work by her hands, she could sew, but you have to have enough sewing to pay the rent, to buy food, and how many kids? We got 4 kids. And they were a baby, Homer, William, and then there were 2 boys, and then the girl was the eldest. She's a teenager, about 13, 14, okay? And so the other 2 were about 10, or 11, 12, and about 6. Okay, and where were they? So this is the East River right down here. Here's Bellevue Hospital. And if you go straight up this street right here, 3rd Street, right there's a blue dot. That was Martha's. There's a little tiny alley here, very funny, called Broadway Alley. And they say back in the day that P.T. Barnum kept his elephants there. I guess you could do that in New York City back in the day. You could do anything in New York City. But so looking at these, if you're familiar with is it Samson? I can't remember. The fire maps. If you look at the fire maps in the day, it'll tell you what the building is made of. All these pink ones are made out of brick, but there were also yellow ones that were made out of wood. And you can see the crosstown tracks that the horse pulled the trolley kind of up and down town and so on. There's all kinds of stuff here. And let me see, from here, it was right about over here, Lexington. In this vicinity is where the Home for the Friendless was. So it was like 4 blocks away, 6 blocks away. It was in the neighborhood. What was it like to live in a tenement? Well, you know, we had ships coming in. There were immigrants coming all the time. They didn't have fire escapes in the early days. Those were later additions after the triangle shirtwaist and things like that. They passed laws that you had to have fire escapes. There were no fire escapes, so the place caught fire, you jumped or you burned. I mean, those were your choices. But this is actually behind the Tenement Museum. I was just, for show, I was trying to see that. And this is from the Tenement Museum. Those are the privies, which were all shared. There's a standing water pipe down here, all shared, because they didn't have running water. And you can hang your laundry out. They won't let you take pictures inside the Tenement Museum, but you can go on to their website and you can do a virtual tour. It's very cool. There'll be a window to the outside, and then there'll be windows between the rooms just to get the light to go to the back room. Very interesting. Yeah, and this is just a church in the neighborhood. It was right around the corner from them. It's funny because I walked from Martha's apartment over to where the Home for the Friendless was, and you could easily imagine there was a woman sitting on the side of the road selling water, bottles of water. There were dogs running loose. There were a couple of soldiers going by, and like a crazy person on the street, and you're like, it was probably just like this. It was probably just like this. Actually, and there was a powder tower And there were some regiments in upper New York City. At that point, there were still hogs kind of running loose in the street, eating garbage. And up toward Harlem, it was still farms and stuff. I mean, so it wasn't the big city that it is now, but there were no flush toilets. I mean, they were sharing, a standing water pipe. So cholera, dysentery, I mean, this kind of stuff would sweep through. So rough times, right? So here's Martha. Martha is up here, right here, and it says she's a dressmaker, and she has 2 of the kids with her. This is the New York census of 1855. She had 4 children. Now, if you were a single mom with very little money and you were busting your hump trying to work, and a neighboring charitable organization said, we will take your kids and put them in school and feed them and give them medical care if they need it, you might take it, right? Well, which ones would you send? Well, you don't want to send the baby because maybe you're still nursing. And your older daughter, your daughter could maybe help you. Maybe you could work together. In this particular census, Martha, she has 2 kids with her, the teenage daughter and the baby. And then there's another, Julia Pendleton and her daughter Amanda, which is another single mom and her teenage daughter. So they're sharing a studio apartment, probably sharing the bed, taking turns is my guess. The hot bed thing, you guys have heard about that, where you share a very small place and someone works night and someone works day and you just sleep in the same bed when there's nobody in it. They did that a lot in World War II, the factories. You guys remember that? You don't remember that, that's before your time. Of course it was. The older we get, all those people are gone, so I'm like, you don't remember that. Okay, so the 2 middle boys went to American Female Guardian Society, Home for the Friendless, on the same day. This is just a stock photo. I don't have photos of these people. The only way I know how Ira looks is because I got his records from the archive, his Civil War record. So it said that he was dark-haired, blue-eyed, ruddy complexion, and about 5'2". So that's how I know how he looks. But in any case, this is a typical photo of kids of the day. In reading the records, you could see Ira came in and almost the next day was shipped out to Lockport, New York, which is beyond Albany. It's actually, you head west like you're going to Ohio. Lockport is the Erie Canal coming from the river and heading downtown or downstate. And there were so many men working on the Erie Canal that they didn't have people to pick apples. So he went to an apple orchard and worked on an apple farm. George, if you read George's record, George had a learning disability. Maybe George was autistic. He would never be a scholar. He was punished for not, doing his schoolwork. George had some issues, and I don't know what they were, but I made him sort of autistic in the book just because the clues led me to that. And at a certain point, George's family was like, we're done with him, we don't want him anymore, and they rejected him, and he was sent off. I'll come back to that. But that's what I know about these boys. So the 2 boys in the middle, they're hungry, they're loud, they're dirty, they're whatever. You don't have a bathtub in your little studio. Not only that, if you have a special needs kid, does anyone have special needs grandchildren, for example? Sometimes they have screaming fits, and if you're in a boarding house or in a place that has thin walls, that could be problematic too. So she had a raft of problems to deal with. And in any case, she sent these kids, she took them to the Home for the Friendless. And Sarah arrived with Homer about 6 months after the 2 boys. She was put on a train immediately, that very next day or week, and was sent off to Galesburg, Illinois. Galesburg is a big train hub, so the trains still go through there today. It's also where the Lincoln-Douglas debates took place, right? There's a big statue of Abe Lincoln there. So the little boys stayed in the Home for the Friendless for about 6 months. Sarah was sent off, and she was sent off to a very well-to-do family in Knox County, Illinois. The Ferris family, and one of the Ferris children eventually invented the Ferris wheel. Brushes with greatness. Okay. So, does that make sense? You have 4 kids. I got the 2 kids in the middle. What am I going to do with them? Let's put them here, and I'll try to make it as far as I can with my daughter and the baby. And at some point, the wheels came off, and she couldn't manage that either. So, this is literally one of the ads, from one of the ads that were sent out to the newspapers over the telegraph or by mail. But these ads ran in all the towns out along the way where the trains went. The train's going to be here next week, Thursday, and we will have a beautiful baby. We have 6 beautiful, healthy babies. One has a club foot. Do you want them or not? I mean, they would say, all these ads would say what they were sending out. We have 10 big boys who can help on your farm. We have 8 big girls who can help you in your house or your boarding house or in town. I mean, they were selling children, essentially. They were selling them by advertisement, and then they got out to wherever they were and the kids went to work. So I don't mean like trafficking, but kind of. Because again, these are kids with no one to speak for them in New York City. Get on the train, out you go. So both boys left together on that train in January 1856, the 2 little boys together. So Homer is the baby. He's about maybe 3 by then-ish, maybe 4, hard to say. And George, the one who had some learning issues, they were on the train together. George was 6, 7. So if you're 6 or 7 years old and your baby brother's with you on the train, chances are there were other people who had kind of separated them, but they were supposed to be in the same town. They got there in early February. Remember, again, there's no insulation in that train car. So both boys were taken. The Gastons took Homer, and they paid their $7.50 for his train fare. That's what that receipt was. That was written that day. The Gastons saved it for him, I guess. They didn't call him Homer, they called him Willie. And then George went with the Barnum family in Oberlin, and later, when they said, you know what, we don't want him anymore, luckily, George got sent to Illinois and was with Sarah's foster family, so they ended up together. So here's the train ride. Here's New York City. This is where right up here is Lockport, and then along Lake Erie here is Oberlin, and the train kept going and ended up over here. She ended up in Fairbury, but they ended up over here in Illinois. And the kids kept going. They went to Iowa, they went to Kansas, Nebraska, Minnesota, a lot of kids in Minnesota. They ended up in Texas. There were a couple in California, but mostly they were going to the Great Plains states to help with the farming, right? And what else was I going to say? Oh, yeah, and if they did try to put Jewish kids with a Jewish family or black kids with a black family, or Catholic kids with a Catholic family through the Home for the Friendless. But ultimately, if they became Protestants, that was fine. There really was not that much regard for their cultural background. Okay, so what happened? The thing that grabbed me by the throat to write this novel is that Martha, in those records that I was just showing you about Homer and what have you, she keeps writing and asking for her children back. When can I get my children? Mrs. Lozier wrote again asking for her children. Do not choose to do it, is what they said. They chose not to give her back her children. Martha was able to find Sarah, and I'm presuming because her daughter was old enough to write letters that they probably exchanged letters. At some point, George joined Sarah, so those two were together. And Ira had his own adventures, and I'll show you in just a second. But a 3-year-old child is not going to remember his mother and is not going to remember anything about himself or his history. This is Ira. He ran away from, he was beaten a number of times, punished, like whipped by his adoptive or his foster family. and got in trouble for fighting, and they called him boastful, and he said he talks big about his father's farm and all this kind of stuff, which it all makes sense, right? This is just a picture of a Union soldier. I don't have photos of Ira at this age, but I do have photos of Ira later. He was always kind of a hoot and getting into trouble. But in any case, he ran away, he lied about his age, joined the Battery M of the 1st New York Light Artillery, and he fought for 5 years. He was at every major battle. He was at Gettysburg. This is the Gettysburg Memorial right here for his unit, and he got all the way to Atlanta. So that's a long time and a lot of battles, if you know anything about the Civil War. And he was working with horses. This is what light artillery was. They had the small cannon here, not the giant ones, but these little guys. So he worked with horses, and he probably had no hearing, I would think, by the end of it. Anyway, he received a Civil War pension. He ended up, and he married Mary Gaffney, who was from Lockport. She was an Irish maid at a boarding house in Lockport. So I can just imagine they must have met at some point. At the end of the war, he hightailed it back to Lockport. They got married and had a baby right away. And then they went to Illinois and joined the rest of the family. So Martha had her 3 children back. What did Martha do? She was able to find 3 of her 4 children, and she, in the various censuses, she worked as a dressmaker and a hat dresser. But there's no evidence that she ever found Homer, who was going by Willie Gaston at that point. And so Martha lived with Sarah and Sarah's husband and the 2 children, so with family, until her death in 1904 in Illinois. But in doing all this research, I came across, remember the father-in-law, Malcolm? Malcolm had some money, and when Malcolm died, he left money to Martha. $100 to Martha and $100 for each of her 4 children. That's $500, which would be very nice today. But can you imagine what that would have been like for her? None of this would have happened. So why did Martha leave Newburgh? I don't know, but luckily I wrote a book and made it up. They had enough money that they would have stayed together. But her children would have become wards of this lawyer because they're half orphans. So she wouldn't have actually been the custodial parent. She would have been there with them, but she couldn't have made any decisions about their money because she was a woman, and women can't make money decisions, clearly. In 1853, whenever it was. So whatever it was that had Martha leave Newburgh, she never received those funds. She never received those funds. They remained unclaimed. Now that is a mystery, right? So what's happily ever after? Martha was able to live with Sarah the rest of her life. Sarah's husband, he was very successful in his little town, very little town. He was a gardener and a florist. They had 2 children. Neither of them survived. The baby died at 2 or 3 years old, and then there was a darling son that they all doted on, and he died of consumption at about 22. Ira married twice, and that first child, or his first son, they named William Homer Lozier. And what does that tell you? I mean, if you're just guessing, again, do you name a child for someone that you hated? No. My theory is that they never got over losing Homer, and they always wondered what happened. So he named his first son the same name. And then here, George was a laborer. He was like a toll taker. He had a chicken farm for a while. It was never serious brain work, though. It was always pretty much manual labor. So he married, he had 3 children, and I'm actually become in contact with these cousins. They're like 5th cousins once removed, or 3rd cousins twice removed. I can't remember. But they exist. And here's William Lozier Gaston. Here he is, very dapper. And these are his two granddaughters. One of those is my grandmother. So maybe because he was adopted by a very solid middle-class family, he was successful in his life. He had beautiful clothes, they had a car, they had that nice home. His daughter, Laura Valletta Gaston, was a gifted violinist. We still have the violin. She went to Oberlin Academy, and there are pictures of her as a 12-year-old girl, playing her violin. And so, as I say, Willie, was close to his sister, his new sister for life, with Celia's portrait in the desk, which we still have. And he didn't know his birth year, so he gave the arrival of that orphan train. So he said that his birth year was 1856, but he was about 3 or 4 at the time, so that wasn't quite right. And he lists his father as French and mother unknown later in life, so he didn't remember her. As far as I know, Martha never saw her baby again. And eventually left Ohio, moved to Pomona to be with his daughter, and these are his two granddaughters. This is in Pomona. And he's buried only about 40 miles away from his brother George, unbeknownst to him. Here's the two William Homer Loziers. This is the nephew, and this is Winifred Agnes Gaston and William Lozier Gaston, but that was the first William Homer, and this is the second. Again, that just tells me this family had a lot of grief because they never found their little brother. So here's 4 generations again. I actually have recently joined the DAR through these connections. I did have this connection before I got through the brick wall, but since going through the brick wall, I can see several other places where I am descended from revolutionary patriots. And Silence, the woman that I wrote about in this novel here, she was a Greenleaf. She married a Greenleaf, and she had 6 sons, all of whom were patriots. So I have a strong connection there, but my primary connection is through the wonderful McDonald's. And again, this is my aunt, and I look a lot like her. I have the same face, basically. This is my grandmother, Winifred. This is Laura Valletta Gaston, and this is Grandma Gaston, or Winifred Gaston. And as you can see, she's smiling her beautiful smile. Cranky, right? And this was Laura G. Gaston Dew, became a member of the DAR back in 1945. And so I had an incredible amount of research that I got through the Orphan Train complex, and it was so amazing to get that packet in the mail. I literally, my knees buckled when I said, and they're siblings? And then I read it and I said, and the mother asked for them back? What happened here? So I found that very shocking but fascinating. And as a career journalist, which I believe I mentioned, I've been a journalist, chasing down all this information, I wanted to write a book about it, but I couldn't, for some reason. Do you write it like Nancy Drew? Like, I'm going to tell you this whole story of how I found this information. Or do you write the story and say, later I found blah, blah, blah? I mean, I had trouble writing it and getting it to really grab you by the heart or whatever. And I decided I was going to sew a dress by hand so I could learn what it was like to be Martha. I'm going to sew a dress by hand, da, 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 da. And I swear this woman started talking in my head. I started having this fictional voice telling me, you know what, back on the farm things were great, but we got to the, New York City, and the Irish were everywhere, and the Jews and the Germans and the Russians, and we just couldn't do it. And so I ended up writing this draft of the novel, and it took me about 8 years from beginning to write it until publication. And an interesting thing happened along the way, besides the pandemic and all the other things that have happened. But I have 5 children myself. Oops. I have 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. And our son took his own life in 2019. And so we had about 2 years where we basically just stared at the wall blankly, and it certainly was not able to write. It was just a horrific time. If you've ever lost a child, you know what that feels like. But when I came back to the book, I could tell this story as a bereaved mother, and it changed everything, and it became so much easier to tell this story from Martha's point of view. So I'm going to just take a drink now, but then I'm going to read you just the first 2 pages of the book to kind of set you on your path, and then I will be happy to take any and all of your questions. So this is called The Bereaved. So this is Newburgh, New York, October 1959. Now, the whole course of this story was about over 15 years till Martha got back with her daughter and everybody. I compressed it to about 3 years because fiction, you get to make things up. Don't let the facts get in the way of the story, right? So anyway, it made it more of an arc and more compact. So, prologue, Newburgh, New York, October 1859. My man Bram died on a Saturday evening when all the world and its children take their baths. He was just 33. The boys, Ira, 12, and George, 6, were sharing their bathwater at the folks' house where I'd sent them to steer clear of the sick air, and my big girl, Sarah, 13, was up there too to keep an eye on them. No misbehaving before the grand folks, I said. Respect your elders and be silent at table, not like home. Sarah said she'd see to it. Homer stayed with me as he was still on the teat. I wanted to keep them safe from whatever dread disease crept through Bram's veins and wept through his skin. Doctor had said he thought it was measles, then camp fever, and it turned out he was right the second time, though Bram hadn't been near any camp. The field hands passing through with help for harvest, mayhap, they were Irish. They might have borne lice, which brought on camp fever. The burly men scratched at themselves when they paused for a drink of water or a pipe, and I suspected nits the time that orange-haired girl came by the little house. I told her to wait outside, fetch the bucket of buttermilk down cellar myself, and sent her scratching away. I want to itch my own scalp now, thinking back on it. Not a week later, Bram came in from the barn, bits of straw fluttering off his sleeves and a sharp pain in his head. Squinting at the golden autumn sun, I put him right to bed. Excuse me. Within a few hours, he was fevered and chilled by turns. I sent Ira afoot to the doctor's house and bid Sarah take George to the big house to their young aunties. I kept Homer as far away as I could instead of snug in the big bed with his mama and papa. I laid him on a quilt on the floor with a spool to gnaw while I simmered broth and spooned it into Bram. I sopped my own bread and ate it standing while dirty sheets boiled white again and Bram moaned and sweated and fluxed. The days ran together while I fought for Bram's life. In those dark hours, I prayed and cried, rocked my baby, sponged my husband, begged and muttered to an indifferent God. But before Bram breathed his last, I had known. I had heard it coming, as clear as the rumble of a train far down the tracks. It didn't matter now where he'd caught this fever, where the rough red rash had come from. The only thing that counted to me and our 4 children is that Abram Lozier, my husband, their father, was dead. That Saturday night, I sat with my late husband's body, holding his heavy hand while his dead body cooled at last. My damp cloth, no use to him now. My whispered pleas, just a hiss of air between my lips for all the good they'd done. His blue eyes still peeked beneath his dark lashes, and I pressed the lids down again and again, but they would open, his blue gaze upon me to say, as if to say he was sorry. I'm sorry too, I thought, scared and sad so deep that I felt faint. What will we do now? Where will we go? Where shall we stay? Must I ask the favor of your folks to keep us? What will become of us in this new cold world? I've been alone before, been Martha to suit my name for all my 31 years, but with children now, my heart hammered and then seemed to stop, and I felt my panic rising like foam in a pot. Homer, heavy as a smoked ham, drowsed in my elbow, a string of white drool at his mouth. I set him in the trundle bed near the wall where he couldn't roll off and tucked the quilt around him. Thank the Lord for this sweet lump, his brown hair mussed, fat fists curled as he snuggled into dreams. Homer kept me anchored. Meanwhile, the bedroom stank like baby flannels and sick, sour as a milk pan left unscrubbed. I had spent 10 days attending my husband, barely seeing the children, greeting them through the crack of the door. But work never ends. When morning came, when morning came, the women would come. We'd wash and dress Bram in his crisp white shirt, his fine broadcloth suit, and pin his tie in place, every stitch from my own needle. Blue socks I had knitted and darned, the color of my eyes he had called his favorite color. Polished boots on his feet, one of my finely hemmed handkerchiefs in his pocket for the hereafter. Charlotte and Malcolm, Bram's folks, would have a coffin made in town, and there'd be a funeral at the Dutch Reformed Church, and then Bram would be tucked into the family plot near our 2 other babies with a space at his side for me. Between now and then, I'd better sew black bands on the children's clothes and dye Sarah's plain brown dress black. She was old enough to wear proper mourning at her age, so her dress must grieve with her. And there should be food for the callers. We'd offer them donuts and pie, cider from the barrel, and me with 2 floors to scrub before the folks knocked at the door in the morning, and any small thing that Charlotte might fault in the management of my little house, she would notice. I was tired. Bram was dead. I was still Martha, toiling instead of praying. There was so much for the newly bereaved to do. No time for tears. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, maybe we could turn the lights up a little bit and then I can see people. I hope that all made sense. No questions. Yes, ma'am.
I understood when I read the book that they were indentured for a number of years, children were.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, do you have any idea what percentage of the children were indentured and returned versus those that were adopted and remained in families?
I don't know the difference. The indenture would mean that they were more workers and less of the family. And usually that meant they were 14 years of age, and that would last until the boy turned 21, or until the boy turned 18, and the girl turned 21. So for a boy, it would be as little as 4 years. If they were a little younger than that, they might do an indenture for work, but mostly, so it wouldn't be longer than the 4 years. Then at that point, he's free to go. He's not kept there.
There are no statistics taken that let you know what percentage of the children were indentured versus...
I think they do exist. I don't know that percentage, though. The younger children were supposed to be adopted into the family and treated as one of the family, whatever that meant. I mean, if you beat one kid, you beat them all, or everyone worked the farm. I mean, but if you're part of the family, you're part of the family, versus you're older and you're basically considered kind of a junior servant, and you do get some money at the end. They didn't pay them weekly, but they would save up the money, and then when he, after his 4 years or what have you, he would have a little nest egg that had been paid to him in that time. That was the understanding. Some kids were sent back, but really they didn't want the kids coming back to New York. They wanted to find another home nearby. So some kids did get bounced a little bit, but they did the best they could to find homes for them. Yes, ma'am?
Well, I enjoyed your book greatly. I didn't expect to, because I had read The Orphan Train years ago, and I thought, oh, I don't know, and some kind friend in my book group loaned me her copy, and I was transfixed. And I really appreciate all the history of how this came about that you explained to us today. But I was impressed by all the fine points of poverty that show up in your writing, how much a penny could mean. And so I really enjoyed reading the book, but the ending seemed to, I mean, I know I've never tried to write historical fiction, so it must be quite challenging to deal with all of these facts that you unearthed over all those years. And then how to end it, how to make your readers happy. But I thought the ending were just unbelievably too good.
So I don't want to give any spoilers. So I don't want to, I'll have to be careful how I say this. So I worked on this story a long time, and I went to, for example, there's a Lake Tahoe community of writers. It's formerly known as the Squaw Valley Community of Writers. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's people like Anne Lamott and Amy Tan were signed when they went up there. And I went up there twice with this manuscript, and they said, you know, so many bad things have happened to Martha. Can you not give us a little hope at the end of this novel? Can you not give us a little bit of hope? And I think the positive is that she ended up with, you know, her children. She did end up with 3 of her children. I mean, you never stop mourning that one child, but she was able to find some happiness. She joined the church and belonged to the community in, you know, Fairbury, Illinois, and you know, was there with Sarah when Sarah had her children. They changed Sarah's name to Delafina was her middle name, and they changed it, and that's kind of a point there's a point in the novel where Martha has retained contact with her 2 elder children, but they are changed. They're so changed. They're like, why are you changed her name? You know, her name is Sarah, but now you're calling her Della, and they're beating my son. And then he disappears and joins the army and so on. So being able to control what happens to your children was a hard thing, I imagine, for her. And as I was describing this novel, I would say it was like Sophie's Choice in the Civil War, because she had to decide, do I keep the children but I can't work? Or do I leave the children alone and I go to work, and then the kids are going to be like these wild street kids? Or do I put 2 of them away and I keep 2? Or why couldn't she go back to Newburgh? Why couldn't she go get that money? What was it? And so I created a reason, because that's fiction, that you get to make things up.
It was believable.
But it's not unbelievable, let me just say. It seems like that could be one of the issues, so without giving it away. Yeah, I mean.
So I think I'm a little confused. So in fact, the Sarah or Della and her Martha and the little boy.
George, yeah.
George did all live together. You've got records of that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, she ends up in the book, she ends up in Galesburg with her daughter and with George, and they do get a little house and they whatever. Because I said in reality it was like 15 years, by the time they wouldn't let Sarah out of her, you know, indenture until she was 21, and she basically just got married. She married someone, so she was able to leave the indenture, and as soon as she married, Martha moved in with them. But they basically, the American Female Guardian Society basically said, these are not your kids anymore, you got nothing, you signed them away. And I do have, I'll put these over there, or you can pass them around if you like, but it's heartbreaking to read this. It says, Ira Seabolt, age 8 years, and Ira Seabolt Lozier, age 8 years, and George Frederick Lozier, age 5 years. I, Martha E. Lozier, having buried my husband and being destitute of funds, do hereby commit and surrender them to the care and management of the American Female Guardian Society, blah, blah, blah. April 10th, 1854. And here's her actual signature here, right? And then this on a different page, and it says, I consent to the above surrender, and it's somebody has signed it. And then down here, Sarah Delphine Lozier and William Homer Lozier, aged 14 and 4 years, so he's 4 years old here. I, Martha E. Lozier, having buried my husband, do commit and surrender them to the care and management of the American Female Guardian Society, and that was in 1855. So I have this massive spreadsheet with a timeline of, okay, who's here and who's where, and kind of like that meme, with the guy with all the, arrows and the ribbons. But anyway, I'll actually pass these around if you'd like to see these different pieces. Yeah, someone else said, why do you make so many bad things happen to her? And the problem is, in fiction, if you make everything happy, and then there's no story. You have to do mean things to your characters. You have to give them something to struggle against. Sisyphus has to keep pushing, because otherwise there's no struggle. And if there's no struggle, there's no story. It's one of the dark secrets. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You wrote a couple of novels, and when you started, did you think you were going to become a novelist?
No, I was a journalist because that's how I could make a living as a writer, but really I was a poet. But my parents were like, wake up and smell the coffee. You can't do that. You'll never make a living. You have to go be real, come to the real world. So I secretly wrote poetry for a very long time, and worked as a journalist for decades instead, because I could do it and get paid, and I learned how to be a journalist in the days when you did it with a typewriter, not with a, my first day of journalism school, I still have my little zipper pouch that has my X-Acto knife and my non-reproducing blue pencil and all that kind of stuff that we used to have the light tables and the wax rollers to roll out the newspaper. And because we didn't have word processors, you had to get really good at writing a really good first draft, first time, on deadline, and write really fast. So I type extremely fast, and I write a really good first draft. So it's easy for me to draft out the first draft, and then it's harder to make it actually a really good story for fiction. But the thing that kicked me over, I had written some other stuff before for my master's degree. I'd written a novel for my final, whatever it was, project. But it was actually putting myself in her shoes and trying to sew this dress by hand. It was like a Halloween costume of a prairie dress or whatever, and it was tedious. It was just a lot of work to sew on the ribbon and to try buttonholes by hand. Not fun. And they didn't have zippers back in that day, so everything's buttons and ribbons and bows and what have you. Putting myself in her place and thinking about, what did Martha know? What could it have been like? And I had everything except the actual child loss, and then after that I was like, okay, now I get it, and it was a whole other layer. But yeah, so I had the skill set, but I hadn't applied it in that particular way, if that makes sense.
I wanted to say that I really appreciate a lot about your novel, and thank you for setting me straight. Now that I know that good things really did happen to them after they suffered, but there's so little really known about these kids, these babies and little children who were just sent away.
Well, the Orphan Train Museum has these records where they were visited, and it'll say so-and-so was punished for fighting, so-and-so boasts about his father, so-and-so. It has these reports. So-and-so is a good boy and has become a Christian. He's joined the Methodist Church. It's that kind of a thing, but you kind of have to read between the lines. So when they changed Homer's, they stopped calling him Homer and they started calling him Willie. Well, he was a little kid. He wasn't going to know the difference. And William is much more dignified than Homer, apparently. But then there's Sarah, and maybe Sarah was too working class of a name, and they thought Delphine or Delphina was much more elegant, but then they called her Della. So is that better? I don't have, I'm not in 1860. I don't know I just know, like, well, what's a dorky name now, or what's a name that sounds fancy? Her name is Tiffany, or is it Ethel? You know what I mean? It's like, all I know is what I know now. Yeah, so I just had to kind of, like I say, try to put myself in her place, and I really feel like there's this scene in the novel where she's got her scissors and she's got her wedding ring, and they don't have anything to eat, and her thimble. So she's got the tools of her trade. So here you are, guys. You got the tools of your trade. You got your hammer, you got your saw, or you got your wedding ring. Maybe it's not the same. I don't know if it's the same for guys or not, but for women, it's like the wedding ring was basically her shield against being, against mashers, you know what I mean? Against the dudes who wanted to hit on her. And so she could say, I'm a married woman, I'm a widow. This is her protection. Without it, fair game. So you sell that, it's gold. It could bring you food, but then you're laid bare. Oh, okay, well, then you sell your scissors, you sell your thimble, the silver thimble that's been in her family for, 5 generations. Okay, it's just a thimble. But then what do? How do you show that you're actually a seamstress if you don't have a thimble? How do you, I'm here to work, but I don't have my tools, hire me. What's it gonna be? Either she sends the kids out she makes cookies and tries to sell the cookies at one point. Do I send the kids out to sell them and then they're just street rats? Do I go out myself and leave the kids home? Impossible choices, and she kept making choices to do the best she could, but without a societal system that helped her and a family that helped her up, the wheels just stopped turning, and she had to do what she had to do. So I certainly don't blame her, but I have incredible compassion for her.
Well, I've really appreciated the scene where the 2 boys come home and they've had all that good food, and they're describing what it was like there. It's like heaven to them. Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't she? Thing is, why wouldn't she say, yes, take care of my children?
Sure.
But she didn't realize what it meant, really, that she was really signing away to all these responsibilities.
And so all I know is in those records, which are, being passed around, where it does talk about Homer this, Homer that, or Willie this, Willie that, each of the children had that kind of a record, and they'll say, oh, he was fighting, or he will never be a scholar, he should work with he's helping so-and-so cut his timber, he'll just be a worker. Or Della is a very fine young lady, and she's become a Christian, blah, blah, blah. It says what's going on with them, and in between, it'll say Martha or Mrs. Lozier wrote and asked for her children back. Received another letter from Mrs. Lozier. So she clearly was asking for them back again, and it says, do not choose to do it. I'm like, now what do? How do you fight that tidal wave? I just don't know. So she cried out to tell her story. I just felt like I needed to tell that story.
What was the hardest part? Was it the historical research, or was it actually writing the novel?
Writing is really hard. It's so hard. I love but hate writing. I love having written, but writing is really hard. It's so hard. How do you get the person across the room? She walked across the room. But did she walk? Did she skip? Did she hop? Did she amble? Did she perambulate? And what was the point of her crossing the room? I have the hardest time making them do things. It's like, remember, you had paper dolls, you had your Barbies. Well, she's going to do this. Well, then she's going to do that. And you have to make it, there has to be a reason. You can't just fling everything into the book. I read a book. I edited a book for somebody, and he put a color on everything. She walked across the brown floor and moved the gray chair, and then she picked up the black gun, and I'm like, do I need that information? I don't need that information. So trying to choose things. one of the things I really wanted this story to be about was women's work and kind of the impossible ask of, Women's Day is asking us, can you have it all? It's like, I don't want it all. I just want one thing. Can I just either do my work or have my kids? To do everything is too much. Or can I get some help? I don't want it all. But multitasking is absolutely a thing. And it falls disproportionately on women, and so it was, the boys did a little bit of stuff. Ira took on, he slept on the floor, for example, and he took on picking up scraps of wood so they would have something to burn. But it disproportionately falls on the women, on the girls, and when there's a limited amount of food, it ends up going to the boys. The boys get the meat and the girls get the potatoes. And so that was part of it. I also, the multitasking, the labor, basically, this is what I have to do. And I have 3 beans and I have a piece of bacon, and how am I going to stretch that? I'm just going to add more water. And what can I sell? Well, I can't, those shoes have holes in them. Maybe I can sell those shoes. And just the constant accounting in her head for what she had, and as it got smaller and smaller and smaller. And what's the next worst thing? They can all get sick. What's the next worst thing? They can get robbed. What's the next worst thing? Tidal wave. You have to kind of figure out what's coming. And life is like that. You just don't know what's coming anyway, right? So you do the best you can. But I wanted it to be about women's work, and that's why I started that prologue by saying she doesn't have that grace, that moment of being able to really appreciate or feel her husband's loss, because tick-tock, she's about to be inundated with people, and she has to do this public mourning, and what's going to happen next, and there's no money. What are we going to do? So it's always work. I was writing this story when, in the previous Trump administration, the kids were kind of disappeared. The kids were sent off to camps. And there was a video of a little boy who was returned to his mother, and he didn't recognize her. And he was kind of wandering around, and she's like, the mother was like saying, like, Johnny, it's me, it's me. And then she just kind of like sat down on the floor and said, he doesn't know who I am. And that little scene is just like, I have to have something like that, because how would you know at 3 years old, 4 years old, how would you know? Especially, he went for almost a year, I think he was in the orphanage, and then he was stuck on a train, and then he was sent off with some other people. So when mommy shows up, who are you? I don't even know who you are. It's heartbreaking. Yeah, really heartbreaking. Okay, have I talked my head off? Almost. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I will have